Because you are one of the largest local critics of all things Lionel Messi. We have not had a lot of local criticism of anything Messi related. Right. You have been someone somehow who has been a vocal critic. Messi is, for those of you who haven't been following this because we haven't talked about this, Hong Kong and portions of China are furious with Messi because he played in exhibitions after being there and they thought he was healthy and they didn't understand why he didn't play before them. And so he's got a legitimate Hong Kong controversy on his hands. And now he comes to Miami with what you and Mike are saying, and this is dangerous for this franchise that has never done anything important or winning until Messi got here. Like, this franchise has been irrelevant the entire time it has been in town.
They're about 4 years old. So
I know, but until Messi, they had done nothing.
But that's really fast for you guys to go from that to what I imagine is going to be a spectacle later this week and the opening of a season that you guys are telling me is championship or bust. And I'm like, really? We're going to do that just because they went from last place to looking really respectable because they got somehow the best of Messi.
They did end up finishing close to last place in their conference last year. But I think where the disconnect is, you hear championship or bust, and you're applying your tiny American sports brain to it. There's 4 opportunities for them to bring home hardware.
I know.
Yeah, they got to win one of them.
Yeah, but in a way, though, that's part of the problem, right? In the middle of MLS season, when you're playing Leagues Cup matches, when you're playing U.S. Open Cup matches, and you're splintering.
That's up in the air, actually.
Okay, but your top 4 players are all like 36, 37 years old. It's difficult. Like, you're going to have to rest Messi.
It is,
more
and also
than you'd like.
and also to have a roster that is compliant with the MLS. And they've had big time injuries to some younger players throughout this preseason. I think if you look over their track record over the last 15 matches, be it exhibitions or end of the season meaningless games, it's not good.
Right.
They've played one really good month of soccer, and it was Messi's first month where they won the Leagues Cup trophy, which actually felt like an achievement. And you've seen MLS prioritize that over the oldest trophy in American competitive sports right now. What's happening with the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup trophy is fascinating because MLS decided to pull their top teams out of this competition because the money's not worth it. They get more money for Leagues Cup, but you have all this tradition. Soccer fans hate what's happening, but the U.S. Soccer Federation is so tied to the hip of MLS that if MLS says we're not making enough money and no one contributes more money to U.S. Soccer Federation than us, they have to. They're at the will of the MLS here. So there's a pretty fascinating thing going on with that cup competition. But Miami has 4 different opportunities: the MLS League season, which, because of how mainstream sports fans work, and I just use Stugotz and Billy as an example, when they're confused as to how someone wins League Cup because they Google the standings and they realize that Inter Miami's at the bottom of that. I think the one that matters the most is the MLS Cup, followed probably by Leagues Cup when you consider the resources that Apple has put behind it, and that's just a competition that was created last year. You have CONCACAF Champions League, which now is going by a different name.
I feel like you've lost both Chris, Cody, and Tony.
So I'm following it. I know what he's talking about.
4 cups.
There's four opportunities presently. Again, I spoke to the ambiguity surrounding the U.S. Open Cup, but there's 4 opportunities for them to win hardware this season.
But which one matters the most, I guess, is my point.
I guess MLS Cup, because whenever you try to speak to a fan about how Miami's doing this season, they'll Google standings and they'll see that Miami's not.
MLS Cup number 1, League Cup number 2. So if you win League Cup, it's like, oh, great, we won it, but like it doesn't really matter.
If you want to go like in true scope, because there is a Club World Cup coming to this country that is replacing a Confederations Cup, you should honestly try to prioritize CONCACAF Champions League because it gives you an opportunity to be
World Cup.
There is an opportunity to be called the best club in the world, and the only way to play yourself into that competition is by winning CONCACAF Champions League.
So the third most important is the most important.
CAF, okay.
I would concede that.
And then Club World Cup.
What is a success, Greg?
If they don't win the MLS Cup on a team with Lionel Messi,
the first one.
No, that's the first.
The number 1, Dan. Yeah.
The Leagues Cup is second.
If they don't win the MLS Cup this season with the only full year of Lionel Messi, that's the starting point they have to win. And because there are so many different competitions, there are so many matches that they will have to play with an old
This is a new
team.
and unimproved Dan Le Batard
And
Show
that's
with
the reason
Stugotz.
why.
Gamble on by DraftKings.
let me start it off here.
Match preseason tour, which I call preseason torment,
Never mind,
because
let
it's
him.
ridiculous that they put their players through all that, let alone the nightmare that happened in Hong Kong and the ensuing controversy, which Messi has to go on he's big in the Far East. He has to go on this channel and apologize, saying, no, I was really sick. It wasn't for political reasons.
And we're back.
It's a nightmare.
He's had to apologize to a lot of oppressive governments for a guy that hasn't said much throughout his career.
Never said anything.
Yeah,
He never says
and
anything.
He is hated because of his lack of participation in some of these friendlies.
Right.
Friendlies that probably shouldn't have been scheduled.
He's apologized to the U.S. government?
I want to backtrack for just a second here because, Mike Ryan, you were not finished with your point, but in the transition on executive producers, you wanted the segment to keep going, and Chris Cote just ram-railed his father into the hard net workout because you wanted to extend. You weren't done talking, and neither was Greg Cote. We found a Greg Cote wheelhouse, something that he's super passionate about, and we got caught in the weeds of whether you want to win the third trophy or the fourth trophy or the first trophy.
What I was trying to avoid was a second segment on soccer. As much as I am passionate about the sport, I understand what the audience wants and what our aptitude is for these things. So I just wanted to extend that rather than what happened, which is us starting a second segment about soccer. When you're out, you're out.
I think it's a fascinating story because Inter Miami, in a way, is in a no-win situation. Lionel Messi is a money tree for them, and they are squeezing it for all it's worth, which is why they went on that 5-nation preseason tour, which I thought was unwise.
Soccer or not soccer, I mean, come on. This is the biggest athlete in the world, and he's playing in Miami, and it's not a small deal, and that there would be a season of expectations. I understand, but the season is coming up right now.
I understand, and everyone kind of agrees. Messi, huge star, and that is a traditional sports take. They have to win something, otherwise this season is a failure. And it's hard to explain to an audience that there's 4 opportunities to win something, and when most of that audience only cares about one, that whether it's accurate or not, to actually put that as the top priority, that's what they end up Googling. It's a really difficult thing to explain.
This is how it starts, though. Like if you want people to have your Premier League knowledge, you want people to bring in something from Europe, and if you want to actually grow the sport here with multi-generations, multi-cultures, it starts by sort of explaining this, getting frustrated because you know more than the people who are gathering around just because they got the famous guy.
I don't think I talk anybody into liking the sport by over-explaining these things. It would be a dream for us to be where we probably should be as a host nation in 2026 for the World Cup, and I've got so many eggs in that basket, hoping that the way that we talk about these things right now, it's difficult to connect with Joe Sports Fan when Joe Sports Fan watches the daytime sports programs on the worldwide leaders, and they all kind of handle the soccer discussion the exact same way. If the talents aren't going to take their prep for it seriously, then why should I? And I do think that we're missing a major opportunity here. The World Cup isn't some niche thing. We saw the numbers for the Super Bowl, and I'm sure you've seen this graphic go viral, about 123 million people watching the Super Bowl compared to over 1 billion for the World Cup. 2026 is not some novelty. There's 7 World Cup matches happening in this city alone. It is a massive opportunity. It is a massive boom for our economy, and we're just beginning. There is a years-long ramp-up to the World Cup, and I kind of get frustrated in that I see the people, the conversation starters, the needle movers in this industry, and they're really only capable of talking 2 sports. And I really hope that we send people like Stephen A. and Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon, provided that they're still doing this then, to some kind of boot camp. Like the Inside the NBA people go to a 2-day-long March Madness boot camp where they learn things like the 2 guards' name from Quinnipiac.
Well, this is so interesting, Mike, when you talk about this, because I got to wondering about this in the hostility toward the All-Star game. I wonder if people have sort of calculated the damage that we've done over the last 20 years in the discourse around that league. around the NBA that turns that into the travesty it became, where it's a bunch of consternation, at least in part because there have been only 2 sports that the big networks have cared about for the last 15 years. They made basketball, the way that we talk about basketball has knocked baseball out of the way, and hockey's been dying to be talked about this way, and finally is. Like, now, hockey's having a media resurgence in that you have a lot of smart people that aren't storming out of the All-Star game like Bob Ryan, who are loving what they're seeing from hockey. You do need a certain media literacy here, and it is fair to say I'm guilty of it. I've been guilty of it. All I was talking about on television there was football and basketball, and I did like talking baseball, but generally we didn't do that. We had partnerships with football and basketball, and so that's where we spent all of our time, selling football and basketball. I think that's one of the corrosive things that people haven't noticed industry-wide. Once you get into these partnerships and you have rights with these teams, then you become the infomercial broadcaster, controversies or not, for that league. The NHL suffered from not being on ESPN for all those years.
I don't know how you get to the point where soccer talk is entertaining, because I think we know that the stories that have captivated recently, but there is so much background knowledge that you need to get to that it's really difficult. I've struggled doing it, and I'm not of a talent like Stephen A. Smith, but to explain to your audience an entire backstory inside of 30 seconds to actually get to the meat of a conversation, I don't know if it's possible. I just think you need to infuse the daytime sports programming talent base with people that are capable of doing this. Younger generations, if you listen to podcasts like Pardon My Take, they're not soccer agnostic. They don't say how boring this is and who wants to see a 0-0 draw.
They don't really talk about it, though.
No, but they don't ignore. They don't talk about it in a way that is off-putting either. There is
Just
a
ignore it,
sincere.
kinda.
No, they don't ignore it, especially if there's like a big look. For one beautiful day in November, everybody in December of last year, we were all soccer fans because that World Cup was that World Cup final was one of the greatest sporting spectacles we'd ever seen. I do hope that there is an infusion of sports talent that can talk about the NFL and the NBA, but also not show their ass on soccer, so we can talk about this and really build to something special.
And I would add that one of the 7 matches Hard Rock Stadium is going to host in 26 is a quarterfinal match. That's when it gets really serious. You're down to the final 8 teams. That's going to be huge globally. That's a Super Bowl, a quarterfinal World Cup match. That's enormous. It's going to be one of the biggest events ever in South Florida history.
Soccer in the United States,
Okay.
it's dead.
There it is, ladies and
Done.
gentlemen. Okay.
See ya.
So 4 cups.
Yeah, this was what I was trying to
You want to
avoid.
win the Club World Cup? Is that one super important? Because it's got World Cup in it.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that's a new competition. That's a big one.
That's a big one.
Well, it's an expanded version of an older competition.
but different than CONCACAF. CONCACAF
See
is
ya.
a
It's
separate
just a regional.
regional one. Okay.
Ladies and
Done.
gentlemen. Okay.
See ya.
League Cup.